So new missionaries coming in the field, I would really advise them to only to determine, to decide, and stay true to their plan with their trainer and all their companions to only speak Spanish when they're out in public. Luckily, I had a trainer who was incredible. And he was so helpful, and he told me right off the bat that we were only going to speak Spanish when we were out on the streets proselytizing, and that made all the difference because once we contacted someone, I had been speaking Spanish, so it was natural just to keep going. And also, Spaniards are very impressed when they see two Americans speaking their language when they don't have to, when they're not talking to them. Lots of Spaniards were really curious. Like they would ask us, "Oh, I saw you guys speaking in Spanish. Like you're really good at it. How do you, why do you value our language so much? What's your story? Why are you learning it?" So that would open a lot of doors. But sometimes I would slip and speak English on the streets, and I would notice a distance would be created between me and the people I would talk to on the streets because I would have to switch all of a sudden, and I would feel more distance from them and from getting to know them and their culture because I had just been, this American speaking English talking about American things, and then all of a sudden try to incorporate myself into an authentic experience speaking with a Spaniard. It would be difficult to make that switch. So part of Preach My Gospel talks about trying to assimilate and embrace as much of the culture as you can. And I just want to testify to that, of the difference it will make in the mission if missionaries really strive to do that with their companions and just try to love the Spaniard people and really appreciate their culture and their language, and you'll make lifelong friends and really have some amazing, sacred, sweet experiences.
Well, first off, when I got changed to Spanish speaking, I was just trying so hard to have a good attitude about it because it kind of stinks being out 14 months and having a new language thrown at you. And my companion didn't really know Spanish either, and so her and I both were just struggling. But that first day, well, actually, even the first couple of weeks, every single person we met that that I would just be like, "Hola," and they'd be like, "Oh, hola," and then they're like, "Oh, hablan español? Do you speak Spanish?" And I'd be like, "Oh, sí, hablamos español." And then they would start talking, super fast, rapid fire, and then I'd be like, "Take it away, Hermana Willis." And she'd be like, "I don't know what they said either." And just quit talking to people if you don't know how to talk to them. I'm like, Jesucristo es bien. I don't know. And so I just tried really hard. But that first day, we went up and we talked to this lady. She didn't speak any English, and we were trying to talk to her. And while my companion was trying to, talk to her and have a conversation with her, I saw her necklace, and it was so pretty, and I wanted to tell her that I liked her necklace. And I was just pulling any words I knew from high school Spanish, almost anything. I didn't know how to say necklace, but I was like, I'm going to go for it. So I was like, yeah, so quiero tu necklace. And she was like, no. And I was like, wait, what did I just say? And then my companion was like, wait, no. And she's like, she likes it, ella le gusta, your necklace. And I just felt so bad. I'm like, I don't want your necklace. I just like it. And so it was just funny moments like that you just had to laugh at yourself for making mistakes, wanting to take someone's necklace away from them.
Yeah, language studies was hard. That was probably one of the hardest studies because it just sometimes you feel like I'm good. I know what I need to know or something. Or other days it's just there's so much to study, or I'm not getting anywhere just by myself studying. The hardest thing and probably the best thing study-wise that I think helped me, which I didn't do all the time, but I tried to do, was memorizing scriptures in that language. I just had another few things whenever I'd find a good scripture I thought was awesome, I'd write it down, add that to my list of things to memorize, and occasionally go through and try to memorize a few more scriptures. And that was difficult memorizing's hard, but I think with that you really come to know the format of the language a little bit better and how sentences are structured. You have these kind of, your brain starts to make sense of that structure, of that sentence structure, why things are said differently. And probably because of that, you start to speak more like Bible talk than normal talk in the language, which I think happens to many missionaries in their own native language or not. So it seemed memorizing was probably the greatest help. And then just reading the Bible and the Book of Mormon in that language as often as possible.
It's pretty similar. For example, I picked up real quickly that in Spanish, like the double L would be replaced with LH in a lot of the Portuguese words. So for example, like orgullo or estoy orgullosa. In Portuguese, it would be, or for example, tengo orgullo. In Portuguese, it would be tenho orgulho. And so it like similarities like that. I remember the first few weeks, I would say estoy a lot because that's how you say I am in Spanish, and it's esto. So just like little tiny differences like that. But if you know Spanish, you'll pick up the Portuguese pretty quickly. Even if you learned a little bit of Spanish, like in high school, so like Spanish is not like your native tongue. Like my companion, she knew Spanish a little bit before the mission, and a lot of other sisters as well. And they all said that that helped them a lot in picking up Portuguese.
Not knowing Spanish beforehand, I got a little nervous in learning a new language, but we studied a lot in the MTC, and when I got to the mission, my companion was really helpful in helping me learn and not feel really overwhelmed. So a couple things that helped me to learn the language were to make flashcards and also carry a little notebook that I would write down words I wanted to know or words that I heard people say but I didn't know what they meant. And so I'd write them down and then just not worry about it until I got home. And then during my language study, I would look at them up in the dictionary and try to memorize them and had a goal of using those words that I learned the next day. And once I was a little scared at first to start talking. I was really self-conscious about my Spanish. I was embarrassed, and you're not going to learn the language until you get over that part because you need to practice and speak to actually learn it. So I learned that lesson a couple weeks in, that you just kind of have to get over that embarrassment because the members don't expect you to be perfect, and neither does the Lord. He does not expect you to instantly know Spanish and be perfect at it. He wants you to work hard, and He will help you along the way, but you do need to put in your effort and study and open your mouth. That way you can share the gospel, and learning the language will become a lot easier at that point. I also learned a little bit of Mayan. In our mission, a lot of the people speak Mayan. So if you're going there, you'll definitely learn some words, and all the missionaries have a fun time practicing them together. And they'll say Bashkabalik, which means like, what's up? ¿Qué tal? Or Mishpa, that means nothing, like, or nada, just, so if someone asks you Bashkabalik, most people just say, oh, Mishpa. So there's a little Mayan for you. But it's really fun to really involve yourself in their culture and learn their language, and people really appreciate just your effort in trying to communicate with them in their language.
So halfway into my mission, they changed my call to Spanish. And so the very first time I went to dinner with a member that didn't speak English, I was trying to just be so polite and thank them for dinner. And in Spanish, the word hombre is hungry and hombre is man. And so I was trying to tell her that I used to be so hungry And then I wasn't hungry, and I was so thankful for the food. And I ended up saying, before dinner I was mad, and now I'm not. So thank you so much. So that was pretty funny and embarrassing, but luckily she continued to let us come over and she still fed us, so that was a blessing. I don't know. They wanted to introduce Spanish sisters to the mission, so they didn't have any. And they needed a couple people that could train the new missionaries that were going to come in. And so they asked me if I could change my call so that I could train some of those new Spanish missionaries that were coming. So they gave me some books a week before and they said, study up. You'll get a companion in a week and see how it goes. When I got my new companion, she's from California and she just was learning Spanish too. So we were both kind of trying to help each other the whole time, which was a little stressful because neither of us could really help each other too much because we didn't really know the right way to say it. So when we studied together, we were like, is this right or is this right? And then we would just never be able to know because both of us were learning. So it was a little stressful, but it was also really good because both of us had to try so much harder to learn it because we couldn't just lean on the other person entirely. They've been opening up new Spanish areas and getting new Spanish missionaries. So it's pretty exciting. We have an hour every day that we can study Spanish. And I think it's important with that time to build off of what you studied before. Because a lot of times during that hour, I would just feel so overwhelmed because I'm like, I want to learn everything and I have an hour to do it. But it's probably better to just focus on one thing, maybe a week, and just build on it slowly every day. And don't think about the other stuff you don't know yet. Just kind of master one thing at a time. And if you have a companion that speaks Spanish really well, which I never had a companion that was fluent, but if you do, take advantage of that opportunity and just talk with them in Spanish all the time. And even if you don't, if you're both learning, try really hard to talk in Spanish when you're in the house together, or just all the time when you're in the car and walking and things.
I have older siblings who learned Spanish on their missions and spoke Spanish on their missions. That was one of the reasons that I wanted to learn, and I also had friends from Spanish-speaking countries. So I took 2 years in high school and learned some of the basics, the things you learn in the first 2 days at the MTC. And I was around it a lot because of friends and the friends of friends. That's why I had a desire to learn Spanish. And for me, learning the language wasn't that hard. And it wasn't much of a trial for me. There were times that I couldn't understand, but I found that the members you're serving and the people you are talking to admire you, first of all, for wanting to learn their language to speak to them. And then also they have a desire to help you. And so if there was ever a time that I was stuck or didn't understand something or had a question, I would ask the members. Instead of asking my companion or trying to figure it out between us, I asked them, and it allowed them to build a trust with me to know that I was serious about learning the language and I really wanted to. And it showed them that I had that desire and they would help me more. And so any time that I learned a new word, I would write it down. And I had a little book of vocab words and I would try to use them and I would look it up and remember it. And so that was another thing that they saw that, oh, she really wants to learn. I'll keep teaching her more. And so they would teach me new words. And another important thing is we're given language study time in the morning. And I would use that just to study a particular concept that I was kind of not really familiar with or not very strong with, and then I would try to use that during the day. And I think the biggest thing about learning a language on a mission is to allow the Spirit to help you and to pray for help. And the gift of tongues is very real, and we can pray for the gift of tongues, and Heavenly Father wants us to be able to share the gospel to the people we're serving. And so if we have the desire to learn the language with the intent of sharing the gospel, it'll come so much faster for us. And we'll be able to pick up the things that we need to learn for the purpose of sharing the gospel.
And some of the slang words, so they don't speak Guatemalan in Guatemala, they speak Chapin. And Chapin means someone who is Guatemalan, and the girl would be Chapina. And they always say pura Chapina or puro Chapin. And they always say pues, just like a filler word or so. What else do they say a lot? Calidad. which means quality is the translation, but it's like, oh, that's awesome. Like, calidad, calidation. They also say pilas, but pilas means like batteries in other places, but in Guatemala it's like, oh, like, she's so smart, like, she's so on top of it. So they always be like, she's so pilas, and they'll always do that. Not just the missionaries, but like a lot of the members will pick up on it because they're with the missionaries. So we always love to do that. It was really fun. Un montón, they also say that a lot. I don't know if it's really slang there, but they say it a ton. So I studied Spanish 4 years before my mission. I did 3 years in high school and a year at BYU. I think my year at BYU was way more helpful than my 3 years in high school. And I loved the language before it was my minor, so before going on my mission. So I was really enthusiastic about learning it, and I really wanted to. But I think the hardest thing for me was understanding what people were saying. I could say a lot of things, but I couldn't understand the majority of what people were saying. So I think what was important is that, like, when I was walking with my companion, she was from Mexico, so she didn't know English very well. So I would like ask her questions and then like listen to her responses, and then if I didn't know words, I would ask her, hey, like, what does that mean? I'm not sure what you just said. But I also learned that in Mexico they speak a lot differently than they speak in Guatemala. So then I would say the word she taught me and no one would know what I was saying. And then she would say it and no one knew what she was saying. And then I realized, oh, like, Mexico has a lot of different words for things. So I learned a lot of words from Mexico in the beginning. And then I also practice a lot with missionaries, like Latin missionaries in zone meetings and district meetings. I would try and talk to them and like have them help me with my pronunciation and with learning new words, because a lot of them knew English pretty well, and so they would help me and then I would help them with their English. So that helped a lot. I think the most important thing is to do your best just to like study the scriptures in English, but also have your Spanish scriptures side by side, so that you can look at how they would say that in Spanish or what it would be phrased like. So then you can learn new words. I think learning the words in the gospel are really important, but also conversation words, like being able to have conversations with people, let them know that you care about them, you want to know their interests, what they like to do. I think it's important to get to know your investigators more than anything in the beginning, so that way when you do teach them the gospel, it can be personalized. So learning the words in the church are important, but it's also important to learn other words as well.
So there are 3 languages in Chiapas. I can't remember what the third one is, but there's Spanish and there's Tzotzil. And so if you're a white sister missionary, even if you're American, if your skin's darker, you might be able to serve there, but if you're white, you won't, because there was conflict with a certain political party years ago, and Americans came in and helped the Mexican government, and there was skirmishes, and so there is a little bit of a hurt feeling towards American people. But I visited up there and it was fine, nothing happened or anything. I stayed there for a few days in Chinalo. It's a really pretty language. They have in Tzotzil, I remember is hech, and that means yes, and they're very, very small, very beautiful people. There's a brother who lives in Tuxtla. He's the one who made the book, How to Learn Tzotzil for Missionaries. And he had served there before. He's from Mexico City, but he lives down there now. And he works a lot with them in a nonprofit organization. And it's really interesting because I think Elder Bednar came and he said that they were very chosen people. They're very, very spiritual, very special. The Spanish is fun. All my Mexican companions are like, they do not speak Spanish the same as we do. And everybody who I talk to now, they're like, you sound like a Chiapaneca, which is what they call the girls down there, Chiapanecas. They're like, you speak like a Chiapaneca. And because they say lots of pues and all sorts of funny like slang, and they end their words differently and they'll speak fast. You'll go to the MTC. I was there for seven weeks and I loved it, and I thought I had gotten a bit of a grasp on Spanish, and I got there and I couldn't understand a word, and I felt so discouraged because all I wanted was to be able to speak the language. And so I kept praying, please give me the gift of tongues, the gift of tongues, the gift of tongues. And I studied and studied and studied. And then it hit me, I couldn't understand what they were saying. Even if I could speak to my companion who knew a little bit of English, the first 3 months I really was having a hard time understanding anybody. And so I switched to praying for the gift of interpretation of tongues, because if I couldn't understand them, then how was I supposed to teach them? Because I don't know where they are and what they need. And so I started asking for the gift of interpretation of tongues, and that's when things changed. When I started focusing on what they were saying and what they needed, and stopped thinking about what I had to say to them and how I could help them, that's when I knew what I could say. I don't know how to explain it. And that's when the Spanish came, actually. And it came quick. Praying for the gift of interpretation of tongues unlocked the door for the gift of tongues. And don't be embarrassed. Like, they'll make fun of your Spanish for the rest of your mission. It doesn't matter how well you speak your Spanish. They will. But it's not that they're being mean. They just think it's really funny. You're from a different place. And they'll just tease you about it. Oh, you said this. But they just think it's cute. They really appreciate the fact that you're learning Spanish. Don't speak English in front of them if you're with an American. Like, unless somebody's having a really hard time, obviously, if some sister missionary or somebody's crying and she can't learn the language, speak to her in English a little bit. But don't. If you have a companion who's from America or who speaks English, don't speak it in front of other people. It's really rude. And they will be offended because they don't know what you're saying. And just speak Spanish all the time. Do your language study. Just enjoy it, because I miss it so much. It's so beautiful. Don't be discouraged. Just say whatever you think, like whatever comes in your mind, how you can express your idea, and then ask them to help you correct it. How would you have said it? How would you think it would be better to say it? But just throw it out there, and then they'll help you. And if you're really sincere about asking for help, they will help you. All I wanted was to be able to speak the language, and so I kept praying. I studied and studied and studied. And then it hit me, I couldn't understand what they were saying. The first 3 months, I really was having a hard time understanding anybody. When I started focusing on what they were saying and what they needed, and stopped thinking about what I had to say to them and how I could help them, that's when I knew what I could say. I don't know how to explain it. And that's when the Spanish came, actually. And it came quick.
In Belize, then you have lots of different people from different countries. Like, you have a lot of people that are from El Salvador and who have come pretty recently and speak just like that. Like, half of my area in Belmopan were Salvadoreños, and they just spoke like Salvadoreños. But in Orange Walk, then there were a lot of people from Guatemala, and so they spoke a little bit differently. I couldn't use the same kind of slang that they use in El Salvador. And there are certain words that they use differently, like just different words for cool. And like in El Salvador, they use the word chivo for cool, something that's cool, and that means young goat in normal Spanish, and I believe it means gay in Peru, so you gotta be careful about that. And just there are other little words that aren't bad words, but just get used in El Salvador. Generally, people will have fun telling you about what the slang is in El Salvador. But in Belize, then you get the people that are fresh from their countries, from Honduras or El Salvador or Guatemala, that have their way of speaking. And you also get all the people that have grown up in Belize, and they speak kind of more of a gringo Spanish, which is easier to understand, but a little simpler lots of times. And they show English words in there too, which is really cool. But lots of times with like the gringo Spanish, then they won't really roll their R's or click their R's, like say puerta instead of puerta. And so generally I tried to avoid doing that, just to try and get better Spanish. But it makes things easier to understand, I guess.
Studying the language is actually a big thing for me. I'm actually now a Spanish major, and I grew to love the language because of how I studied it on my mission. Some people go for just listening and learning the language through listening to other people. What I did was I did a combination of things. So there is a time set apart for language study during your companionship study and your personal study in the morning. I've heard that the schedule has changed, and I've heard that it's a little different from when I served, but I'm sure the general idea is still the same, where you have a time set apart for companionship study, you have a time set apart for your personal study, and there's also some time set apart for language study when you're in another country or when you're serving in another language. The most important thing about language study is just to take it seriously. It will help you worlds, and you will be able to express yourself how you would like to faster when you take it seriously. Ask Heavenly Father for help when you're learning your language. It's very important to ask for the gift of tongues because He will give it. That's just a promise. That is something that I found out very quickly on my mission, that I should have taken it more seriously, but I started to take it very seriously after a while, and you have to be humble about it. It's frustrating not knowing everything, and your pride gets in the way sometimes, but if you are very humble about things and you ask, I kept a list in my missionary planner of words I didn't know that I heard throughout the day, and I would either try to look them up or I would ask my companion or remember what they meant, and it was so helpful to just rely on other people's help and to make sure I was continuing to ask questions. Asking your companion, asking your members, asking anybody locally, just people love it when you ask them questions, honestly. They're so sweet. And if you just go up to somebody and be like, hey, I think this is the right word for this, or hey, how do you say this, or hey, I'm a missionary, but I'm new here, I need to learn this word, or I need to learn how to do this, they'll help you. They're super nice about it. And you learn how to communicate really well with people through that as well. There are some very common phrases in missionary terms, but I would urge you to also learn common terms for just that region, for the country. Even slang. As a missionary, you're supposed to talk formally, so I wouldn't encourage you to use the slang, but learn it, because you're going to need to understand what people are saying to you, and oftentimes it is slang when people are speaking to you. I had a companion who spoke fluently English and Spanish, which was just amazing, because she taught me a lot of what I needed to know to just understand other people and communicate better with them, and listen better. And after she opened my eyes to kind of slang and informal speech, I understood 100% better what people were trying to express to me, because people so often let these things slip into the vocabulary, and it's not the formal missionary speech that you learn as a missionary in the MTC and afterwards. So definitely, focus on learning the basics of the language, basic, conversations, basic conjugations and things, but also focus on, things that aren't necessarily formal. Pronunciation is important. You could have terrible grammar and terrible vocabulary, but if you pronounce things perfectly, people will respect your Spanish. And honestly, they'll actually listen to you more as a missionary. People sometimes get distracted by your Spanish if your pronunciation is off, but they can overlook grammatical errors and vocabulary errors, and they'll even help you with those if you're really making an effort. So I would definitely say to learn to pronounce things very well. Just listen. That's my advice. Listen to people as they're speaking. That's what I did. I just listened for a very long time. First few months I didn't talk a lot, but I listened so much and with so much energy and effort that I really feel like the pronunciation came to me, and people started complimenting me before my Spanish was even, correct, before my, speech patterns were even correct or anything like that. Sometimes people would say things like que rollo, which is what's up, or que onda, which is also what's up. They're not super formal, so we didn't say them a lot as missionaries, but que onda is a little more formal. LDS vocabulary that's common, barrio, that is ward, estaca is stake, obispo, bishop, presidente de estaca, mission, or stake president, presidente de misión, mission president, things like that. You'll be teaching people about faith, repentance, baptism, things like that. So fe, arrepentimiento is repentance, bautismo, baptism, things like that. You'll learn those very quickly. It's all over Preach My Gospel. I would say study your scriptures in the mission language from the first day. If you need your English scriptures, buy them, that's fine, but eventually you're going to not need them anymore, and it'll be great.
What I did was I mean, I had a little bit of Spanish before mission, but I read the entire Book of Mormon out loud before I entered the MTC. And I think that was the biggest help for my pronunciation. A lot of the thing is, or another thing, one benefit, I guess, of what I'm trying to say about reading the Book of Mormon out loud, is it gets your mouth used to not only saying the words, but using correct grammar, and just the flow.
It has been said that Mexican Spanish is kind of at the lower end of the spectrum. Like, it's kind of the poorest, slangiest Spanish. Yeah, yes and no. It is kind of at that lower end, but you can speak it just fine. See, so I had Peruvian companions, Colombian companions. They spoke a very kind of proper, clear, clean Spanish. And, you know, people from Spain, they have the je, all the je noise, in Argentina as well. I mean, you speak it how you want to speak it. I tried to speak the cleanest, nicest Spanish I could, and it worked. I mean, people mistook me for a Mexican. Do I look Mexican? No. But I convinced people that I did because I tried to really hit the accent like them, but better than them, because I knew that they spoke pretty slangy. And up in the north part of the country, they actually just kind of Spanglish words. They'll be like, let's go pushearlo. Like, let's go push it. So they'd make push a Spanish word. And they don't do that as much down in the Mexico City part. To just add to that, I guess I would say, you know, slang is going to be thrown on a lot. Once you learn a word of slang, look up the real word. So you just know both. I would say, you know, because you're going to want to write down words you don't know when you're starting out, and to look them up every day. And I'd highly recommend that. Any word you hear you don't understand, write it down and look it up. And you'll start to really pick up the language. But yeah, they'll use slang. Don't accept it for just what it is. And sometimes it's not in the dictionary. Like, you know, slang is not going to be in the dictionary. So you're going to have to ask your companion what it means. And they'll kind of explain it to you. But I would just say understand both, the real word and the slang. Because then, once you come back to the U.S., like, you're going to meet people that speak Spanish from all over the world, and you may not be able to communicate because you're using slang they don't know, and you're going to have that disconnect. So there's slightly different accents from the south to the north. There's a lot more Spanglish up in the north, obviously, because English is crossing the border. There's that mixing area. It's kind of sing-songy. I got made fun of a lot when I came home because of my sing-songy kind of way of talking. So I don't know. I think that's kind of mostly all. The northern accent, kind of in the middle of the country, divide it. There's a southern accent and a northern accent, and you'll pick up on it. And as far as learning Spanish, or what it kind of sound like, I guess. So greeting on the street would be like, you know, you want to be very formal. There's a tú form, which is to say like you, and then there's an usted form, which is a proper one. And you always want to speak to people in the proper one, because, you know, you're representing Jesus Christ. And another proper way is, instead of being like hola, you'd be like good evening, good morning, or good afternoon, right? So depending on the time of day, you'd be like buenas tardes. Tienes un momento, somos misioneros por la Iglesia de Jesucristo de los Santos de los Últimos Días. Traemos un mensaje acerca de Jesucristo y como Él visitó ese continente y enseñó a la gente su evangelio y ha sido restaurado por el profeta José Smith. So we would, and you can probably hear what I'm saying, you know, but it's kind of a simple testimony. We were taught to bear straight testimony right on the street, like even about Joseph Smith, even about the Book of Mormon, because the Spirit would testify to them, and if they're interested, you know, they'll accept an appointment. And so we would testify and then ask for an appointment, and that's it. And sooner is better, you know. Do you have time right now? Could we go to your house? And if they were willing, we'd go with them.